I never imagined that life could shrink into a single room, but somehow mine had. My entire world fit inside that fading studio apartment. Peeling paint, a stubborn window that never closed all the way, and a refrigerator that hummed louder than my confidence. It was all I could afford after losing my job 3 months ago, and even then, I was behind on rent. Each day felt like walking through a fog of dread, and every night I rehearsed conversations I didn't want to have. The truth was simple. I couldn't pay the rent, and the man who owned the building wasn't known for second chances. Ward Ellison was a name that carried weight in our neighborhood. Sharp, steady, and unsettlingly calm. I had seen him only a handful of times since moving in, but he wasn't the kind of person you forgot. Tall, broad-shouldered, always wearing a button-down shirt no matter weather, he moved like someone who believed the world would shift for him. And maybe it did. People stepped aside when he walked, talked softly when he appeared, and always nodded in greeting, though their eyes carried something closer to caution than respect. I used to think he barely noticed tenants like me. I was wrong. The knock came on a Tuesday morning, sharp enough to jolt me out of the half-sleep I'd been clinging to. I froze, heart hammering, hoping for a second knock that didn't come. But it did, stronger, more insistent. I dragged myself to the door, trying to smooth the exhaustion off my face before opening it. Ward stood there, his expression unreadable, his hands tucked into his pockets, as if he were here to discuss the weather. "Calder," he said, my name rolling out his mouth in a tone I couldn't decipher. Not anger, not concern, something in between, like he was holding back both. I swallowed hard. "Morning, Mr. Ellison. You're behind on rent." No preamble, no courtesy, just the truth, placed between us like a brick. "You missed this month, and last month." Shame burned through me. I nodded, unable to form a sentence that didn't sound like an excuse. His gaze wandered past me, scanning the cluttered room, the unmade bed, the chipped counter. I expected disdain, maybe irritation, but instead a faint crease formed between his brows. "You should have called me," he said, lowering his voice. Avoiding the conversation doesn't help. That caught me off guard. I had braced myself for anger, for accusations, not for a remark that sounded almost human. I cleared my throat, trying to steady my voice. "I didn't want to waste your time. I just needed a little more of it." Ward exhaled, a slow, measured breath that softened something in his posture. "Look, I'm not unreasonable, but I can't let months slide. You understand that?" "I do," I said quietly. And I did. The problem wasn't understanding. It was surviving. He tapped his thumb against his thigh, eyes flicking back to me. There was something behind them, a flicker of curiosity, maybe concern, but it vanished before I could name it. "I'll give you 1 week," he said. "But after that, we need a solution." A week. 7 days to fix a problem I hadn't solved in 90. I nodded, grateful and terrified all at once. Ward lingered a moment longer than necessary, like he wanted to say something else. Instead, he offered a short nod and stepped back. I closed the door, then leaned against it, feeling the weight of his presence still press against the wood. The room felt smaller than before, the air heavier. I sank onto the edge of bed, my mind racing through possibilities that didn't exist. A job wasn't going to materialize overnight. Money wasn't going to drop from the ceiling. I had 1 week to perform a miracle or face eviction. The next day arrived too quickly, and I was still pacing my room, chewing my thumbnail, when that same sharp knock echoed again. This time it was louder, brisker. My stomach tightened. I reached for the door, expecting Ward, but when I opened it, 3 men stood there, Ward in front, and 2 strangers flanking him like shadows. The taller one on the left, with sunburned skin and a half-smirk, gave me a once-over. "So this is him?" he said, not bothering to lower his voice. Ward shot him a look. "Don't start, Jax." The other man was quieter, his presence more subtle. Dark hair cropped close, eyes sharp and unreadable. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just observed. Ward introduced them without ceremony. "This is Jax Nolan and Merritt Cole. They helped me with some of my projects." Projects, a vague word that didn't match the intrusive energy these 2 brought with them. I stepped back slightly, unsure whether to invite them in, but they didn't wait for an invitation. Jax walked past me, surveying my space with the entitlement of someone inspecting livestock. Merrick followed, slower but far more deliberate. Ward entered last, his gaze resting on me, almost apologetic, but not enough to explain what was happening. "I told him about your situation," Ward said, as if he were explaining a minor inconvenience. "And they had an idea." Jack scoffed. "Yeah, we figured since he can't pay the rent, maybe he can work it off. Help with the new renovation on Fairview Street." I stared at him, then at Ward. "You want me to work for you?" Ward crossed his arms, watching me with that same composure he always carried. "Temporary arrangement. You help us out, and the rent gets cleared faster. You get some income. It's fair." The proposal hung in the air, and beneath it was a tightening sensation in my chest I couldn't name. Something in Jax's smirk fell off, and Merrick's silence was its own warning. But I was desperate, cornered, and out of options. I guess I could try," I murmured. Ward nodded once, a slow and deliberate gesture, as if he had known all along what my answer would be. Jax exchanged a look with him, one I couldn't decipher, but it made the hairs on my neck rise. A whisper passed between them, too low for me to catch, but the smirk that followed wasn't subtle. Ward glanced at me again, softer this time. "We'll start tomorrow. 8 in the morning." They left as abruptly as they had arrived, leaving the air thick with their lingering presence. I closed the door slowly, feeling the unease tighten inside me. I didn't know what I had just agreed to. I didn't know why Ward's gaze felt both reassuring and unsettling. But I knew something had shifted the moment he arrived with those two men. Whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to be simple, and a part of me already sensed that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. The morning sun hadn't fully risen when I arrived at the old building on Fairview Street, but Jax and Merrick were already there, leaning against Ward's truck like they'd been waiting just long enough to be annoyed. The structure itself looked exhausted, its doors sagging, windows boarded, its walls begging for a mercy renovation rather than a practical one. I stood there for a moment, suddenly unsure if I belonged here, but Ward walked out from behind the truck, and the doubt slid away, if only slightly. "You're on time," he said, his voice carrying a hint of approval. "Good." Jack snorted. Early doesn't mean useful. Ward didn't look at him, but the tightening of his jaw was enough to silence Jack's, for now. Merrick offered no comment, simply handed me a pair of gloves and a paint-splattered tool belt. His eyes flickered across my face with an unreadable expression, not unkind, but definitely not warm. "You'll start with clearing debris," Ward said, gesturing toward the interior. "Nothing heavy. We'll show you the rest later." I nodded and stepped inside. Dust filled the air like an oppressive memory, and every footstep felt like stepping into the past lives of people who had abandoned the place long ago. I swept, sorted, hauled out broken furniture, all while trying to ignore the ache in my arms and the dull throb behind my ribs. It had been a long time since I'd done any physical labor, but something about the rhythm felt grounding, productive, almost hopeful. Every so often, Ward would direct me, his voice calm and steady, as if guiding me through a new and tentative routine. He didn't treat me like someone who owed him money, not in those moments. He treated me like someone worth teaching. Every instruction carried a shade of patience I hadn't expected from him. Jax, on the other hand, seemed determined to make sure I understood exactly where I ranked. He wandered through the building tossing jabs like loose nails. "Careful," he said once, passing behind me. "Wouldn't want you breaking something important, like your other excuses." Merrick shot him a warning look, but Jax ignored it. Ward heard the remark from across the room and called out, "Enough." His tone was sharp, unyielding, the kind of tone that could cut through metal. "He's helping us. Treat him like it." For a moment, Jax looked genuinely surprised, as if he hadn't expected Ward to defend me. He didn't say another word for the next hour. When we finally paused for a break, the four of us gathered outside near the truck. The air smelled of sawdust and early heat. Ward handed out water bottles, his fingers brushing mine for barely a second. But the brief contact sent a strange current through me, an electric warmth I wasn't ready to admit I felt. He seemed to catch himself as well, pulling his hand back faster than necessary. "You're doing well," Ward said, leaning against the truck, the morning light catching the edge of his profile. Most people complained the whole first day. I shrugged, embarrassed by how much the compliment affected me. "I'm just trying to hold up my end." Something softened in his expression, like a layer of armor slipping. But the moment vanished when Jax tossed his empty bottle into the back of the truck with a loud clang. "Brake's over," he muttered, pushing away from the bumper. "Let's get this over with." The rest of the morning moved quickly. Ward worked methodically, explaining things with a calm that bordered on gentle. Merrick operated like a shadow, quiet, focused, efficient, rarely speaking but always noticing. Jax kept his distance from me, though I caught him watching Ward more than the rest of us, as if trying to decode something he didn't like. By noon, my arms felt like they belonged to someone else, but a strange sense of belonging had started to creep in, not with the group, definitely not with Jax, but with the work, with the idea of movement after months of stagnation. Even with Ward, whose presence felt like a tether pulling me out of the mess I'd been drowning in. That fragile feeling cracked later in the afternoon. Ward had asked me to help him move some old cabinets to the dumpster behind the building, leaving Jack's American side to finish stripping wallpaper. The alley was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of every breath you take. We lifted the first cabinet together, our movements awkward but synced. Ward's sleeve brushed my arm, and he murmured an apology, though his voice carried something warmer. "You don't have to push so hard," he said softly. "Just move with the weight, not against it." I nodded, though focusing on the cabinet was becoming difficult. Being alone with him made the air feel too close. There was a gentleness in him that appeared only in small, unguarded moments like this, moments he seemed unaware he was offering. "Ward," I said quietly, unsure why his name felt heavy when I spoke it. "Thank you for giving me a chance." He looked at me then, really looked. His eyes held something I couldn't decipher, something not quite sympathy, not quite curiosity, something deeper. "You don't owe me anything for this," he said. The words slipped between us, soft and disarming. I felt my chest tighten, caught between gratitude and something more dangerous, something I didn't want to name yet. Before I could respond, a loud crash erupted from inside the building. Ward and I rushed back in, only to find Jack standing over a pile of broken drywall, glaring at Merrick, who looked equally irritated. "You did that on purpose." Jack snapped. Merrick's jaw clenched. "If you'd stop acting like—" Ward cut them off. "Enough, both of you." His tone was sharp again, but different this time, more strained, as if he'd been holding back too much for too long. Jax grumbled under his breath and stormed off toward the front door. Merrick shook his head and went back to scraping the wall, though his movements were tense. When things settled, Ward turned to me, and for a second, I caught a flicker of guilt in his eyes, as if he regretted letting me see his world crack, as if he wished he could shield me from the tension that ran deeper than I understood. We worked in silence until the sun started to lower. By the time we wrapped up the day, exhaustion settled over me like a blanket, but so did a quiet sense of connection to the work, to the building, and, in a way that scared me, to Ward himself. As I walked home, replaying the day in my mind, I heard their voices again. Jax's harsh whisper, Merrick's strained reply, words carried by the dusty hallway before I turned the corner earlier that afternoon. "He's doing the same thing again," Jax had said. "You know how this ends." Merrick's response came softer, more resigned. "Yeah, I know." I didn't know what they meant. Not yet, but the unease settled into my chest, heavy and unignorable, and though the day had given me something that felt dangerously close to hope, their words reminded me that I had stepped into something I didn't fully understand, something that wasn't as simple or as safe as I wanted to believe. By the third day on Fairview Street, the renovation site felt strangely familiar, like a place suspended between ruin and renewal, mirroring the limbo I lived in. When I arrived, Merrick was already inside, quietly prying old tiles from the floor. Jax was outside, pacing with a cigarette he never actually lit, and Ward stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled up, clipboard in hand, looking like someone born to take control of broken spaces. He gave a small nod when he saw me. "Morning, Calder." His voice landed softer than the others had, and for reasons I didn't fully understand, that softness made the rest of the world feel quieter, but not safer. Not after the tension I'd sensed yesterday. Tension thick enough to feel in my bones. "We gotta work quickly." Ward paired me with him today, claiming he wanted to go over the electrical layout, though I suspected he had another reason. He didn't trust Jax around me. The thought was both flattering and alarming. As we pulled down brittle wiring from the ceiling, Ward's shoulder brushed mine again and again. It should have felt accidental, but every touch lingered a moment too long. I tried to ignore the warmth crawling up my neck, but Ward caught it anyway. His lips curved in the faintest hint of a smile, one he quickly hid by turning back to the wiring. "You're learning fast," he said, "or you're just patient." I replied before thinking. Ward looked at me then, really looked. The air shifted, thickened. Something silent and dangerous passed between us, something that felt like standing too close to the edge of a long drop. Before I could step back from that sensation, Jax barged in, slamming the door with unnecessary force. "Ward," he said sharply. "Outside. Now." Ward tensed. A muscle jumped at his jaw, the same tell I had seen when Jax pushed too hard. But he followed him outside, leaving me alone with the exposed wires in the hollow quiet of the room. Through the dusty window, I watched them. Jax was furious, his arms slicing through the air with exaggerated gestures. Ward stayed mostly still, but his stillness was the kind that barely contained something. They were close enough that I could see Jax's mouth forming heated words, though not close enough to decipher them. Then it happened. Jax jabbed a finger into Ward's chest. Ward didn't lift his voice, didn't shove him back, didn't explode the way I half expected. Instead, he said something calm. Too calm. So calm that Jax's expression cracked, twisting into something bitter before he stormed away, disappearing behind the truck. Ward stood there alone for a long moment, breathing hard in a way that didn't match his composed expression. When he returned inside, his eyes skipped over me, his voice firm but colder. "Let's finish the wiring." I nodded, though the unease lingered. Whatever argument they had wasn't small, and I was starting to understand something I had previously ignored. This wasn't just a renovation job. This was a stage where old wounds played out, and I had wandered into the center without knowing the script. Still, as the day wore on, the tension between us eased. Ward softened again, offering small hints of something gentler, an encouraging smile, a quiet question about whether I was eating well, a comment about how I seemed stronger each day. The kindness wrapped around me like something I didn't have the strength to resist. Hours passed. The building echoed with scraping, hammering, and the shuffle of boots. Late afternoon light spilled to the exposed beams, making dust sparkle like falling stars. I felt Ward's presence every time he passed near me, even when he didn't speak. At one point, while we were loading broken cabinets into the dumpster, he stopped suddenly and said, "Calder, you don't have to be afraid of me." It caught me completely off guard. "I'm not." I lied. Ward's eyes held mine, steady and unblinking. "You are. Not because of anything I've done, but because of everything you've been through." A strange heat rose in my chest. How could he see that? How could he see me so clearly when I spent months trying to disappear? "Why do you care?" I whispered. Ward parted his lips, but before he could answer, Jax's voice cut through quiet like a blade. "Ward," he shouted from inside. "We got a problem." Ward exhaled, almost frustrated with the interruption. He touched my shoulder gently, a gesture that felt like a promise or warning. I couldn't tell which, then walked back inside. I followed a moment later, stepping carefully over loose tools. Merrick stood near a partially demolished wall, arms crossed, his face carefully neutral. Jax was next to him, holding a splintered support beam as if it were evidence in a crime. "This is rotten," Jax said. "The whole frame in the back needs to be replaced." Ward examined it silently, his brow furrowed, but not just because of the damage. There was something heavier tightening his features, something closer to dread. "This puts us behind schedule," Merrick said quietly. "And over budget," Jax added, his tone sharp, testing. Ward didn't respond immediately. He stared at the rotting wood for several seconds, his mind somewhere deep in the room. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "We'll make it work." Jack scoffed. "You always say that." Merrick shot him a warning glare, but it didn't matter. Ward's patience had finally thinned. "Enough?" Ward snapped. "We'll fix it. All of it." He turned abruptly and walked toward the back exit, pushing the door open with more force than necessary. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving silence in his wake. Jax muttered under his breath. Merrick returned to the wall, his movements tighter than usual, and I stood there, helpless, confused, but no longer blind. Ward was unraveling. So were the people around him. And somehow, I was becoming part of the thread, pulling everything loose. Later, when the sun dipped low and work for the day ended, Ward didn't stay to discuss tomorrow's plan. He simply handed me my bag, murmured a quiet "get home safe," and disappeared into his truck, driving off without looking back. I watched the truck vanish down the street, a knot tightening in my stomach. The argument, the tension, the fragment of unfinished words, all of it circled in my mind like a warning I didn't yet know how to interpret. Something was happening beneath the surface, something none of them wanted to say aloud. And the more I saw, the more I sensed that whatever was coming next was going to pull me deeper, whether I was ready or not. I didn't expect Ashton to show up at my door that evening. Not after everything that had detonated between us, like a fault line finally giving way. Yet there he stood, his breath uneven, his shirt clinging to him as if he had walked through a storm. Maybe he had. The sky outside looked torn open, streaked with restless wind that matched the expression in his eyes. "Can we talk?" he asked, and his voice was low, almost fragile, as though he feared any louder sound might shatter whatever remained between us. I let him in, though every part of me felt like it was bracing for impact. The room looked different with him standing inside it. Smaller, heavier, crowded with the weight of everything unspoken. He didn't sit. Neither did I. It felt like sitting would imply we might be comfortable, and we weren't anywhere close to that. "I owe you the truth," he said, hands tightening at his sides. "And I'm done running from it." The words hit me harder than I expected. Truth, that's what had been missing, hollowing us out from the inside while we tried to pretend we were solid. I folded my arms, not to shield myself, but to keep from reaching for him. "Then say it," I replied. "All of it. Not the polished version. Not the version you think I want. Just the truth." He exhaled slowly, as if preparing to dive underwater. "I didn't betray you because I didn't care. I betrayed you because I cared too much. It scared me. You scared me. The way I felt around you. Like everything I thought I understood about myself was suddenly wrong." The confession felt like a stone dropped into a lake. Heavy, disruptive, creating ripples that reached every corner of me. I didn't respond. I needed him to continue. "I wasn't used to being seen," he said. "You looked at me like you knew me, not the version I show everyone else." And I panicked. I thought if I kept you at arm's length, I could stay in control. But then I pulled someone else closer, just so I wouldn't have to face how much I wanted you. I closed my eyes at the sharp sting of that truth. Wanted me enough to sabotage it. That was a cruelty I didn't know how to unpack. "Ashton," I finally said, "you didn't just push me away. You destroyed the one thing I trusted most, that what we had meant something." "It did," he whispered. "It still does." The silence stretched, tense but not empty. Something lived in it, something neither of us dared to touch yet. I turned away from him and walked toward the window. Lights shimmered across the street, blurring slightly where my eyes burned. Then why am I standing here, feeling like the only one who fought for us? He stepped closer, not too close, just enough for his voice to reach me without echoing, because I didn't know how. No one ever taught me what it looks like to choose someone even when it terrifies you. I opened my eyes, and the faint reflection in the glass showed him standing behind me, uncertain, remorseful, but finally unguarded. It was the first time in weeks I'd seen the real Ashton. "So what now?" I asked, turning toward him fully. He swallowed hard. "Now, I stop running. I take responsibility. I try, if you let me, to rebuild what I broke. The vulnerability in his words felt almost unreal. But pain doesn't vanish just because an apology is honest. It lingers, it tests you. It asks whether reopening a wound is worth the risk of it healing right this time. I took a slow breath. Meeting his eyes, I don't know if I can trust you again. Not yet. I know, he said, and something in his face softened. I'm not asking for forgiveness tonight. I'm just asking for a chance to prove I deserve it. For the first time, he wasn't trying to persuade me with charm or deflection or half-truths. He was just standing there, raw and flawed and painfully sincere. Then start by telling me what you want, I said. You, he answered immediately without hesitation. Not the idea of you. Not the version that fits into my comfort zone. I want you. All of you. My heartbeat thudded once, hard enough that I was certain he heard it. Desire, fear, hope. They collided inside me in a single, disorienting surge. But I wasn't ready to give in. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. We'll see, I said quietly. Words are easy, Ashton. Let your actions speak this time. He nodded, accepting it without argument. And that small surrender, his willingness to meet me where I stood instead of pulling me into his own orbit, felt like the first real shift. As he walked toward the door, he paused, looking back at me with a gaze threaded with something new. Not desperation. Not guilt. Determination. I'll prove it, he murmured, however long it takes. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because something inside me had already awakened, a flicker of possibility, fragile but undeniably alive. And as the door closed softly behind him, I knew our story wasn't finished, not even close.